They thought she was only meant to erase chalk dust. But one night at Princeton, her hand wrote a solution no professor dared to dream of. Morning settled over Princeton with its familiar grace. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, laying strips of gold across the wooden floor of a lecture hall that had seen a century of minds come and go. Into that solemn space stepped Anna, a 21-year-old immigrant girl. In her hand, she carried no notebook, no chalk, no pen, only a damp cloth worn thin from use. Her father had died years before in a construction accident when Anna was just 12. A single slip on scaffolding had shattered their world, leaving her and her mother adrift. Her mother, weakened by kidney disease, now lived tethered to medicines that cost more than their monthly rent. Anna worked wherever she could, cleaning, scrubbing, wiping, so her mother could breathe a little longer. In Princeton's bright halls of knowledge, Anna existed only as a shadow. She passed silently among the students who wore fresh coats, carried new books, and spoke with confidence of futures already half-shaped. Anna's name appeared on no roll, on no roster. Her presence was registered only in the clean slate of the chalkboard after each lecture, a blank stage for others to step upon. That morning, she had just finished wiping away the tangled remnants of equations when the professor strode in. He set down his leather briefcase, lifted a piece of chalk, and looked toward her. His words came not as a shout, but as a blade. "Do not leave any chalk marks. Your job is only to erase. The one who cleans the board will never touch knowledge." A ripple of laughter moved through the students. It was not cruel in itself, but it closed a door with its echo. Anna lowered her gaze, pressed the damp cloth against her chest, and slipped out. But in the breath of silence that followed, as chalk dust still floated like pale stars in the air, something stirred within her. In Anna's dark eyes there remained a flame, quiet, hidden, but unyielding. A flame strong enough, perhaps, to crack a wall that had stood unbroken for 20 years. Her apartment was in a weathered brick building on the edge of town. The wooden stairs groaned under each step. The hallway smelled of damp plaster. Inside, the room was small, its wallpaper peeling, its single window rattling with drafts. Against the far wall stood a bed where Anna's mother lay breathing shallowly, a borrowed oxygen machine blinking faintly beside her. On the table sat the latest hospital bill, pinned beneath a chipped glass. Anna stared at the rows of numbers, each longer than the last, like mountains without paths, but she had taught herself never to bow before them. Each task she completed, scrubbing dishes at night, sweeping classrooms at dawn, wiping chalkboards between, was a single brick she laid on an invisible bridge across the abyss. Some day, if she placed enough bricks, the far side might appear. Over lunch, a thin pot of rice porridge, her mother asked softly, "Are you tired?" Anna smiled. "No, I'm used to it." Her mother's hand, frail but warm, closed around hers. "If you are tired, lean on me. Growing up doesn't mean you don't need anyone." Anna said nothing. The words sank into her heart like drops of warm water falling on dry earth, absorbed slowly, deeply, until they became part of her. That afternoon she returned to campus. The hallways were quiet, footsteps echoing against the stone floors. Along the wall hung black and white portraits of scholars from generations past, their eyes fixed on futures that had since become history. Anna paused before one photograph. A woman, her hair pinned neatly, her gaze unwavering. Anna read the name under her breath, then moved on. A thought whispered in her. Perhaps those eyes, too, had once looked out from the shadows. In the supply room, she rinsed her cloth, changed the water. Her hands were rough, cracked by bleach, yet her movements carried a kind of reverence. To Anna, wiping the board was not simply erasure. It was a way of keeping the stage clean for knowledge, of preparing a fresh sky for stars to appear. Others might never notice, but she believed dignity lived in the smallest of labors. When students filed into the lecture hall, Anna stood near the door. She watched as chalk raced across the board, equations springing to life. She did not grasp all of them. Some seemed like codes from another world, but each line called to her. It was like standing at the shore, watching light shimmer far across the water. There was no envy in her gaze, only a steady, patient longing. Later, when the hall emptied, Anna approached the board again. This time she stood closer, so close she could see each tiny particle of chalk suspended in the slanting light. One string of symbols caught her breath. Something about its shape was familiar, like a key glimpsed once in a dream. She wanted to linger, to copy it down, but her hands lifted the cloth instead. Labor first, dreams later. That was the order that had kept her upright all these years. Night fell as the bus carried her back through streets lit with yellow lamps. In her pocket was a folded scrap of paper she had rescued from a trash bin. Hurried notes about a problem unsolved for 20 years. The problem had been first written on Princeton's chalkboards when Anna was only 10. Back then, her father was still alive. She remembered those evenings when he would carry her outside, pointing to the stars. "Learn, Anna," he would whisper. "If you cannot sit in a classroom, then learn with your eyes, your ears, your heart. Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you." A week later, he never returned. The scaffolding broke. The sky remained, but the man who taught her how to look at it was gone. Anna clutched the paper in her hand on the bus. She could not read all of it, but she sensed in the scrawled lines the presence of a wall, and somewhere within it, a crack. That night when her mother slept, Anna sat by the rattling window, the glow of a street lamp spilling across her notebook. She copied the strange symbols from the scrap of paper, her handwriting shaky but determined. At the bottom of the page, she wrote slowly, "The wall is to be climbed, not only to be stared at." She closed the notebook, listening to her mother's faint breathing in the next room. The professor's voice from that morning echoed again. "The one who cleans the board will never touch knowledge." Anna closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow I will wipe the board again, and if I see even the thinnest thread, I will hold on." Outside, Princeton's red brick halls rested in silence. But in a small, shabby room at the edge of town, a quiet ember burned between the rough palms of a young woman. No one had yet noticed. But one day, in the hush of a lecture hall, the same hands that carried a cloth would lift a piece of chalk. And instead of erasing, Anna would write. And the wall that had stood for 20 years would finally begin to crack. When the lecture halls fell silent and the lamps dimmed across Princeton's courtyards, Anna's world began. Not the world the professors owned, with its libraries and polished marble floors, but a quieter, humbler one, stitched together from scraps others left behind. Every night, after finishing her shift, Anna collected forgotten pages from trash bins and recycling boxes. Some were smudged problem sets abandoned by hurried students. Others were notebooks left half empty, margins filled with careless doodles. To Anna, these were treasures. She would fold them neatly, tuck them under her arm, and carry them back to her small apartment as if she had rescued stars fallen from the sky. On the rickety desk by her bed, she stacked those pages into uneven piles. There were fragments of equations, unfinished proofs, diagrams of spaces she did not yet know how to name. But Anna read them with patience. She whispered each symbol under her breath, as though sounding out the syllables of a new language. Some nights, she understood nothing. Other nights, a pattern would reveal itself, faint as the trace of a footprint in dust. And whenever recognition struck, her heart warmed with the thrill of discovery. It was here, in the dim glow of a second-hand lamp, that Anna's education took place. She had no tutor but silence, no classmates but the shadows on the wall. And yet, within that silence, she listened with her whole being. The memory of her father often hovered over her studies. She could still see him on the evenings before his accident, tired from the construction site but smiling nonetheless, kneeling to show her how numbers could tell stories. He would scratch figures into the dirt with a stick, asking her to imagine ladders, beams, and angles. "A beam too steep will fall," he'd say, "but if you know the numbers, you can build it strong." Anna clung to those lessons. They were her inheritance, more precious than money. Each time she picked up a scrap of paper, she felt as though she were continuing the unfinished dialogue her father had left behind. Her mother, though often weak, encouraged her in quiet ways. On days when the pain lessened, she would sit beside Anna at the desk, watching her scribble. "You remind me of your father," she whispered once. "He built houses. Maybe you will build ideas." Anna blushed at the words, but tucked them into her heart. There was one evening in particular when the curtain of chalk dust seemed to thin, giving her a glimpse of the world beyond. She had brought home a crumpled page marked with symbols that looked almost like music. At the top was the phrase, Gaussian integral. She traced the letters slowly, then the expression beneath, a riddle of curves that seemed endless. She did not know how to solve it. But she read it aloud again and again, the way one repeats a prayer. She discovered that the curve fell gently toward zero as it stretched outward, and the infinite bounds whispered of something vast and elegant. She copied the strange shape into her notebook, surrounding it with sketches, arrows, and her own clumsy attempts at explanation. Hours passed unnoticed. When she finally looked up, dawn had brushed pale light over the window. Her mother stirred in bed, coughing softly. Anna closed the notebook and smiled to herself. She had not solved the problem, not even close, but the mystery itself had carried her through the night. Her days settled into a rhythm. Chalkboards by morning, hospital visits by afternoon, self-study by night. The exhaustion was constant, yet Anna did not complain. For her, each act of survival was part of the same pilgrimage, a journey toward a horizon that glimmered faintly but steadily. Still, hardship pressed against her. Some nights the electricity bill could not be paid, and she studied by candlelight. Some days her mother's condition worsened, forcing Anna to skip her shifts to sit at her bedside. At such times, despair knocked heavily at the door. What chance did a girl with no formal training have of breaking into the citadel of mathematics? But then Anna would recall her father's words. Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you. She clung to that truth as if it were a rope binding her to the mountain. Back at Princeton, Anna grew braver in her quiet learning. While erasing the board after lectures, she began to leave small pieces of chalk untouched, tiny clusters of symbols she wanted to study later. She would copy them quickly into her pocket notebook before wiping them away. To any observer, she was simply thorough in her cleaning. But beneath that modest disguise, Anna was slowly building her own lexicon of mathematics. Her eyes learned to recognize familiar shapes, the tall sine of a summation, the arcs of trigonometric functions, the compact beauty of Euler's identity. She did not master them at once, but she gathered them like seeds, knowing that one day they might bloom. And sometimes, in the hush of an empty lecture hall, she allowed herself a daring thought. What if she could climb the very wall the professors had declared unscalable? The wall had a name on campus. It was a problem in algebraic geometry, written on the board 20 years ago by a visiting scholar and left unsolved ever since. Professors treated it like a monument, pointed to it, marveled at it, but never breached it. Students whispered about it as a rite of passage, though none dared claim progress. Anna did not yet understand its language, but she looked at it often, standing silently with her cloth in hand, as if facing a mural painted in colors she had not learned to see. One evening, as she gazed at the lines of equations, a student brushing past muttered, "That's been up there since before I was born. Don't bother trying." Anna smiled faintly. She had not said a word, had never admitted to anyone that she dreamed of touching it. But inside, the flame stirred again. She had lived her entire life in places others said were impossible, and yet here she stood. That night she returned home with more scraps of paper. While her mother slept, Anna unfolded them, laying the fragments out across the desk like pieces of a puzzle. She did not know how they fit, but she refused to throw them away. She believed that knowledge, even in pieces, had a way of finding its own path. Before extinguishing the lamp, Anna opened her notebook and wrote a single sentence. "Behind the curtain of chalk dust lies another world, and someday I will step through." She closed the book, set down her pen, and climbed into bed. Her body ached from long hours, but her mind hummed like a quiet river beneath the dark. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across Princeton's courtyards. Inside, in a shabby room smelling faintly of bleach and medicine, Anna dreamed not of riches or escape, but of chalkboards filled with light. And though no one knew it yet, behind the curtain of chalk dust, a revolution was quietly taking root. The lecture hall was a cathedral after dark. The echoes of voices had faded. The oak benches stood in rows like silent pews, and the blackboard stretched across the front wall like a vast night sky. This was when Anna felt closest to the world she longed for. She often lingered after her work was done. The last of the students gone, the professors long retired to their studies, only the hum of the heating pipes remained. With the rag still damp in her hand, Anna stood before the chalkboard. It was never truly empty. Faint traces always lingered, half-erased formulas, crooked arrows, the ghostly outlines of questions left unfinished. Most people would have called it smudge. Anna called it memory. She leaned close, studying the pale lines. Her eyes traced each symbol the way one studies constellations, trying to find patterns where others saw only scatter. Sometimes she whispered them aloud, letting the strange syllables rest on her tongue. Other times she copied them into her notebook, her handwriting trembling but steady in its persistence. There was a quiet defiance in this ritual. By day she was invisible, moving quickly so as not to disturb. But by night the chalkboard belonged to her, not in any official sense, but in the way a prayer belongs to the one who prays it. One winter evening, snow pressed against the tall windows, muffling the campus in silence. Anna had stayed longer than usual. The board carried the remnants of a lecture on number theory, rows of equations that curled like vines across the surface. She wiped most of them away, but stopped at a cluster near the corner. Something about the rhythm of the symbols stirred her. Instead of erasing, she held her chalk-stained fingers still. Slowly, hesitantly, she picked up a piece of chalk left on the sill. Its weight was unfamiliar, but it felt right. Anna drew a line beneath the professor's last equation. The sound of chalk scratching against slate startled her. It was a voice she had never dared to give herself. She paused, heart pounding, but the room remained hushed, the snow outside swallowing every echo. Then she wrote a single step of reasoning she had puzzled out from her scraps of paper at home. Just one step, clumsy, but sincere. She looked at it, then quickly erased it, as if afraid someone might see. Yet for the first time, she had crossed the invisible line, from wiping away knowledge to adding to it. When she left the hall that night, her footprints in the snow were the only ones on the path. She felt lighter, as though the chalk had whispered a promise, one she was not ready to claim, but could no longer deny. The nights began to change. Anna still cleaned, still carried her rag and bucket, but now she let herself pause. A symbol here, a curve there, she would leave them for later, scribbling them quickly into her notebook before they vanished beneath her cloth. The notebook grew thicker, its pages filled with fragments, partial equations, tentative arrows, questions scrawled in the margins. At first her efforts were like broken pieces of glass, sharp but scattered. Yet over time, she began to see glimmers of connection. The same shapes reappeared, the same patterns circled back, as though mathematics itself were leaning toward her, repeating lessons until she was ready to hear. She still did not understand the great problem on the board, the one that had haunted Princeton for 2 decades. But she began to sense its gravity. Professors spoke of it with awe, students whispered about it with disbelief. Anna stood before it often, her rag heavy in her hand, imagining what it might feel like to climb that wall. It was not arrogance. She did not tell herself she could solve it, but the wall called to her because her whole life had been a series of walls: poverty, illness, loss. Each had seemed impossible until she endured it, and each time, a crack had appeared. One night, as Anna sat copying equations, a janitor from another building stopped by. He found her hunched over the board, notebook open, eyes focused with unusual intensity. "Still here, Anna?" he asked kindly. She startled, then quickly closed her book. "Just finishing up." He smiled, shaking his head. "You work harder than anyone I know." Anna forced a smile, relieved he hadn't asked about the chalk in her hand. After he left, she sat in the empty hall for a long time, her heart racing. She had almost been discovered. And yet the idea of being caught did not frighten her as much as it once would have. For the first time, Anna wondered if perhaps one day she would not need to hide. Her mother noticed the change in her too. Some evenings after Anna returned from campus, she carried herself differently, tired as always, but with a quiet brightness in her eyes. "What are you doing so late at that school?" her mother asked one night. Anna hesitated. She wanted to protect her secret, but she also longed to share it, so she said softly, "I read the things they leave behind. I try to understand." Her mother smiled weakly. "Your father would be proud. He believed walls are not built to trap us, but to test how much we want to climb." Anna sat by her side, holding her frail hand. The words echoed inside her, aligning with her father's old lessons, with the chalk marks she traced in silence. Spring approached. The snow melted, the air softened, and yet Anna's nights grew heavier with purpose. She found herself standing longer before the chalkboard, chalk still warm in her palm. She erased less and wrote more. Tentative lines, shy attempts, always erased before dawn, but enough to leave an imprint on her own soul. Each mark was a conversation, an answer whispered back to the great minds who had once filled the board. They would never know it, but Anna did not care. What mattered was that she could hear herself at last. There came a night when she paused before the great unsolved problem itself. The equations loomed across the board, vast and forbidding. Anna reached out, almost touching them, her fingers leaving faint smudges of chalk dust. Her chest tightened. She knew she was unqualified, uninvited, unprepared. And yet, as she stared at the wall of symbols, she felt the same resolve she had carried through every hardship of her life. The rag in her hand trembled. She could erase it all, as she always had. Or she could risk a single stroke of chalk. Anna breathed deeply, then lowered her hand. Not tonight, not yet, but soon. For the first time, she believed the day would come. When she finally left the hall, The lamps flickered softly, casting her shadow long against the walls. The night air was cool, fragrant with the early hints of spring. Anna walked home with her notebook pressed close to her chest, her footsteps firm. Behind her, the chalkboard stood silent. But if anyone had looked closely the next morning, they might have seen faint traces, symbols drawn in a hand not quite like the professor's, erased but not forgotten. For Anna, those nights at the chalkboard were no longer just work. They were a promise. And though she did not know it yet, each quiet stroke was carrying her closer to the moment when silence would break, when her voice would be written not in whispers, but in chalk. There was a wall in Princeton that no one could climb. Not a wall of stone, but of chalk. It stood in the lecture hall like a monument, lines of symbols stretching from one edge of the board to the other, dense as ivy on an ancient tower. Students called it the 20-year problem. Professors spoke of it in hushed tones, half in reverence, half in resignation. It had first been written down 2 decades earlier by a visiting mathematician. He had filled the board with sweeping gestures, his voice alive with conviction. When the lecture ended, he left the hall with a promise that someone would finish what he began. Yet the years rolled on, and the promise faded into silence. The problem remained, untouched, a challenge hanging like storm clouds over every new generation. For Anna, the wall was not only a riddle of mathematics, it was a mirror of her life. Each time she entered the hall, bucket in hand, the chalkboard loomed above her. Students hurried past it, professors waved at it dismissively. To them it was an old tale, a curiosity. To Anna, it was a horizon. She had begun to study it in secret. At first, she copied fragments, entire sections she could not yet read. Her notebook became a mosaic of lines and arrows, like a traveler's map drawn without compass or scale. She did not understand the language fully, but she knew enough to see patterns. The same shapes reappeared, the same echoes whispered through different equations. At night, she spread her pages across the desk like broken tiles, searching for pieces that might fit together. Her mother watched from the bed, smiling faintly at the sight of her daughter surrounded by scraps of paper. "Do you understand all that?" her mother asked once. Anna shook her head. "Not yet." Her mother's eyes softened. "Then keep going. One day you will." The problem itself was notorious. It belonged to the realm of algebraic geometry, a discipline that sought to describe the deepest patterns of shape and space, where lines curved into infinity and surfaces folded upon themselves like oceans of glass. The professors said it was unsolvable, at least with the tools they had. Too many paths led to dead ends. Too many attempts had collapsed under their own weight. Anna could not follow all the technical details, but she could feel the heartbeat of the struggle. She sensed the symmetry hidden in the chaos, the rhythm beneath the numbers. And though she lacked training, she carried something else, endless patience. Where others saw futility, she saw possibility. One evening in spring, Anna lingered in the hall long after her chores. The board glowed faintly in the lamplight. She stood before the 20-year problem, her rag damp in one hand, her notebook in the other. She traced the lines with her eyes, imagining each step like a stone on a mountain path. It was dizzying, but she had grown used to climbing mountains no one believed she could scale. For a long time, she simply stared. Then, trembling, she picked up a piece of chalk. She wrote a small note in the margin, a connection she had noticed the night before. Her handwriting was uneven, almost timid. She looked at it, held her breath, then quickly wiped it away. But the act itself changed something. For the first time, she had dared to place her voice alongside the problem that had silenced others for 20 years. Even though no one would ever know, Anna did. The following weeks became a ritual. Each night she copied more, studied longer, returned with fresh eyes. Sometimes she added a step or two of her own before erasing it, leaving only faint shadows on the board. It was dangerous. If anyone discovered her writing on the problem, she might lose her job. But the need to test her ideas outweighed her fear. And slowly, something extraordinary began to happen. The fragments she had collected over the years, scribbled notes, discarded pages, ghostly smudges, started to align. Where once she saw chaos, she now glimpsed threads pulling together. Like a loom weaving a pattern, the problem seemed to invite her into its secret rhythm. One night, exhausted but unable to sleep, Anna returned to the board long after midnight. The campus was silent. Moonlight spilled through the windows, mingling with the glow of the lamps. She stood before the 20-year problem again, her hands trembling. This time, she did not stop at one line. She wrote several, each one flowing into the next, as though her hand had been waiting all these years to release what her heart already knew. For a moment, she forgot she was a cleaner, forgotten she was poor, forgotten the weary body and the world's dismissive laughter. There was only the board, the chalk, and the silent dialogue between her and the problem. When she finally stepped back, her breath caught. The board was no longer untouched. Her lines, small, uncertain, but undeniably hers, glowed in the dim light. Anna stood frozen, half in terror, half in wonder. Then, before fear could claim her, she swept her rag across the slate, erasing every trace. The chalk dust swirled like smoke, vanishing into the air. But inside her, nothing had been erased. At home, she sat by her mother's bed and whispered, "I think I saw a way." Her mother, half asleep, murmured, "Then follow it, Anna, even if no one else believes." Anna nodded, though her mother's eyes were closed. The 20-year problem remained on the board the next morning, as it always had, a monument to futility. But something invisible had changed. For the first time, a girl no one noticed had stepped into its shadow, not as an outsider, but as a participant. And though no professor knew it yet, the first crack had been struck. The spring night was heavy with rain. Drops tapped gently against the tall windows of the Princeton lecture hall, each one a reminder that time never truly paused. Inside, the room stood empty, its benches dark and polished, its board waiting like a vast canvas of silence. Anna had lingered again. Her chores were finished, her bucket already rinsed, but she could not bring herself to leave. The 20-year problem still stretched across the blackboard, sharp and unyielding. Tonight, it seemed less like a monument and more like a living presence, watching her with quiet challenge. She stood with the rag in her hand. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glassy slate, blurred by the chalk marks that curled across it like vines. She thought of her father's voice, telling her to trust the numbers. She thought of her mother's fragile breathing, the hospital bills waiting on the table. She thought of the professor's words, "The one who cleans the board will never touch knowledge." Her hand trembled. For years, she had obeyed that command. She had erased without question, silenced herself before she could begin. But tonight, something broke open inside her. Anna set the rag down. The chalk was small, worn smooth from use. She picked it up, feeling its powdery grit against her skin. The weight was almost nothing, and yet it felt heavier than any stone she had ever lifted. She stepped closer to the board, heart hammering in her chest. For a long moment she simply stood there, chalk poised, unable to move. What if she was wrong? What if someone discovered her handwriting? A single stroke could cost her the job she relied on to keep her mother alive. But another voice whispered from deep within, If you never try, you will never know. Anna drew a line. Just one. The sound startled her, the sharp scratch echoing in the empty hall. She froze, breath caught, eyes wide. No one came. The silence pressed close, but it was not hostile. It was listening. She exhaled slowly, then wrote another line, this time steadier. She added a note in the margin, a small connection she had pieced together from her scraps of study at home. Then another step, and another. The chalk moved almost of its own will. For minutes that felt like hours, she poured out the fragments she had carried in her mind, small observations, patterns, tentative reasoning. It was not a full solution, not yet. But it was a beginning. The first stones laid on a bridge others had long abandoned. When she finally stepped back, the sight stole her breath. There, among the dense forest of symbols left by professors, stood her own lines, fragile, uneven, but undeniably alive. A wave of fear washed over her. What had she done? If anyone saw, they would laugh. Worse, they would know it was her. The girl with the rag, daring to touch a sacred wall. She almost erased it immediately. Her hand lifted the cloth, but she hesitated. For once, she did not want to erase herself. Anna lowered the rag. She left her words there. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the glass. She sat on one of the benches, staring at the board. In the dim light, the chalk seemed to glow faintly, as if the problem itself had accepted her gesture. She felt both terrified and free, as though she had stepped onto a bridge with no way back. She stayed there until the clock struck midnight. Then, finally, she gathered her things and walked out into the rain. Her clothes clung to her skin as she crossed the courtyard, but she barely noticed. Her heart was blazing. At home, her mother stirred awake as Anna entered. "You're late," she murmured. Anna knelt by the bed, brushing damp hair from her face. "I stayed at the hall," she whispered. Her mother's tired eyes searched her daughter's face. "Did something happen?" Anna hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I wrote something, just a little, on the board." Her mother's lips curved almost imperceptibly. "Then the board is no longer theirs alone," she said. Anna pressed her forehead gently against her mother's hand. For the first time, she felt that was true. The next morning, Anna woke with dread. What if someone had erased her lines already? What if the professors mocked them? All day, while washing dishes in a diner, she replayed the moment in her mind. By evening, when she returned to campus, her chest was tight. She stepped into the lecture hall quietly, heart racing. The board was still there, and so were her lines. The professors had left them untouched. Students had walked past them, perhaps thinking they belonged to some unseen scholar. No one had guessed they were written by the girl who carried the rag. Anna stood in the back, unseen, and smiled. Her words had survived the day. That night, she returned again, stronger this time. She picked up the chalk without hesitation and added another step, then another. Her lines grew bolder, weaving into the old framework like ivy finding purchase on stone. And though fear never left her, courage began to take root. For Anna had discovered something no professor could take away. The moment she placed chalk to slate, she was no longer just erasing. She was creating. And creation, once begun, could not be undone. The lecture hall was never truly empty. Even when the benches were bare and the professors had gone, the room seemed to breathe. The wood carried the echo of past voices, and the chalkboard held the memory of 100 restless hands. For Anna, this space had become sanctuary. Each night she stepped into its silence, carrying her rag and her secret hope. But sanctuaries are fragile. One careless moment, one unexpected presence can shatter them. It happened on a night in late spring. The air outside was soft with the scent of blooming trees, but Anna barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the wall of chalk before her. She had just finished cleaning when she felt that familiar pull, the 20-year problem calling her name like a bell no one else could hear. She hesitated, then picked up a piece of chalk. Her heart raced, but she no longer trembled the way she once had. Weeks of practice had steadied her hand. She began to write, building carefully on the lines she had dared to leave the night before. Step by step, the pieces formed a rhythm, like stones across a river. For a while, she forgot the world. There was only the board, the chalk, and the flame inside her that refused to die. Then a sound broke the silence, the creak of a door opening. Anna froze. The chalk slipped from her fingers, clattering against the floor. She turned. In the doorway stood a young man, a student carrying a stack of books. His eyes widened as he saw her standing at the board, her handwriting mingling with the sacred problem. For a moment, neither spoke. The hall seemed to hold its breath. The student blinked, then gave a short laugh. "Are you trying to solve that?" he asked, his tone caught between amusement and disbelief. Anna's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth, but no words came. He stepped into the room, shaking his head. "That problem has defeated everyone here for 20 years. And now the cleaning girl is giving it a try?" The words were not cruel, not even angry, but they carried the sting of dismissal, sharper than a blade. Anna bent quickly, scooping up the fallen chalk. "I was just wiping it down," she murmured, though the fresh lines on the board betrayed her. The student laughed again, softer this time, as if humoring a child. "Don't waste your time. Leave the math to those who belong here." He gathered his books against his chest, gave her a final, curious glance, and walked out. The door closed. His footsteps faded down the corridor. Anna stood in the stillness, her face hot, her hands trembling. Shame rose in her throat like smoke, threatening to choke her. For the first time, she wished she had never touched the chalk. But then she turned back to the board. Her lines were still there. They had not vanished with the student's laughter. And as she stared, she realized something important. The boy had not even looked closely. He had not cared enough to read. His dismissal was born of habit, not judgment. And in that recognition, a spark of defiance lit within her. She whispered aloud to the empty room, "If he will not see, then I will." Slowly, she picked up the chalk again. Her hand steadied. She added one more line, pressing the chalk firmly against the slate. The sound was sharp, echoing through the empty hall like a declaration. Then, before fear could catch her again, she set down the chalk, wiped her hands, and left. That night at home, her mother noticed her silence. "What troubles you?" she asked gently. Anna hesitated. Finally, she said, "Someone saw me. A student. He laughed." Her mother's eyes, though tired, grew fierce. "Did you write anyway?" Anna nodded. "Then his laughter does not matter," her mother said firmly. "Courage is not the absence of laughter. It is writing, even when they laugh." Anna lowered her gaze, tears stinging her eyes. "But what if they find out? What if I lose my job? We need the money." Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. "We need many things, but what you carry here," she touched Anna's chest, "is worth more than all of them. Do not bury it, because someone cannot see." The next evening, Anna returned to the hall, her steps slower but her resolve deeper. She half expected to find her lines erased, but they were still there, faint but visible. She stood before them, remembering the student's laugh. It still hurt, but less than it had the night before. And as she studied the board, she realized that shame and courage often walked side by side. What mattered was which one she chose to follow. Anna chose courage. With steady hands, she lifted the chalk again. Far above the campus, the stars wheeled silently through the sky. Students studied in dorm rooms. Professors wrote papers by lamplight. None of them knew that in a dim, empty lecture hall, a young woman with calloused hands was writing her heart into lines of chalk. And though she had been caught once, though the world might laugh again, Anna no longer feared the act itself. Because each line she drew was not only an answer to a problem, it was an answer to a life spent being told she did not belong. And for the first time, she began to believe that one day, those answers would be heard. Morning light poured into the great lecture hall at Princeton, chasing away the shadows of the night. Students shuffled in, their chatter carrying across the benches like restless birds. The 20-year problem still stretched across the board, a familiar landmark, so constant that many barely glanced at it anymore. But this morning, something was different. A professor entered first, adjusting his glasses as he set down his notes. His eyes wandered toward the board. At first he thought nothing of it, just the same unbroken forest of symbols. Then he leaned closer. There were new lines, small, almost shy, but undeniably present. They extended directly from the last accepted step of the problem, not like graffiti or a careless doodle, but like a continuation. His brow furrowed. He asked the students, "Which of you did this?" The hall fell silent. A few students chuckled, assuming it was a prank, but no one spoke up. The professor turned back, studying the chalk carefully. Whoever had written it had not done so blindly. The logic was coherent, the structure precise. In fact, though incomplete, it looked like genuine progress. The professor felt a chill. Within hours, word spread across campus. Other faculty came to see. They stood in clusters before the board, whispering, pointing. Some dismissed it immediately. "Some over-eager student," they muttered. "Nothing serious." But others did not dismiss it so quickly. They traced the chalk lines with their eyes, following the reasoning. It was rough, yes, but not nonsense. Finally, the department chair arrived. He was an older man, known for his severity, his skepticism. He pushed through the crowd, stared at the board, and went pale. "This," he said slowly, "is not a prank." His words rippled through the room. A decision was made. They would convene an emergency meeting. That afternoon, in a grand wood-paneled room, the professors gathered. Papers rustled, cups of coffee steamed on the table, but the air was taut with unease. The department chair began. "Someone has made additions to the 20-year problem. We must determine the source, and we must determine whether it is genuine." Laughter broke from one corner. "Surely you don't mean to suggest progress was made by some anonymous hand on a chalkboard?" But others shook their heads. "Read it again," one replied, pointing to a photograph taken before the lines were erased. "This is not the work of a prankster. Whoever wrote this knows the language. More than that, they see something we have missed." The room erupted into debate. Some insisted it was impossible. Others whispered that perhaps a brilliant student had finally stepped forward. A few quieter voices wondered whether genius could come from somewhere entirely unexpected. But no one yet imagined the truth. Meanwhile, Anna went about her day in silence. She scrubbed dishes at the diner, carried groceries up a long flight of stairs, returned home to check on her mother. She knew nothing of the commotion she had caused. But that evening, when she returned to the lecture hall, she felt something different in the air. The chalkboard had been cleaned more thoroughly than usual, as if someone had studied it closely. Anna's heart thudded. Had they seen? She sat in the empty hall, notebook in hand, staring at the blank slate. Fear whispered that she should stop, that she should protect herself and her fragile life. Yet another voice spoke louder. You have already begun. Slowly, she lifted the chalk once more. Back in the professor's meeting, the debate raged late into the night. One younger professor, known for his sharp instincts, spoke firmly. Gentlemen, we cannot dismiss this. We have before us the first genuine shift in 20 years. Whoever wrote it understands the terrain. If we ignore it, we risk burying what may be the beginning of a solution. The chair frowned. And how do you propose we proceed? Find the writer, the young professor said simply. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Find the writer. In the days that followed, whispers spread through Princeton's corridors. Students speculated wildly. Some claimed it was a visiting scholar working in secret. Others joked that the ghost of the original mathematician had returned. A few, recalling the cleaning staff they often ignored, wondered aloud, but only half seriously, whether someone outside the classroom had dared to write. The idea was laughed away. After all, genius wore titles. Genius carried degrees. Genius did not hold a rag. Yet the chalk lines remained in every professor's mind, burning quietly like an ember. They could not deny what their eyes had seen. The wall had shifted, however slightly. And so the stage was set. The professors waited, searching for signs, while Anna continued her secret pilgrimage to the board. She did not know the eyes now watching, the curiosity now stirred. She only knew the feeling in her chest when chalk met slate, the moment when silence became speech, when a girl long dismissed began to leave her mark on history. The world of Princeton was about to change, and it had begun with a single hand that no one believed belonged. The whispers began in hallways, at first no louder than the rustle of papers between classes. By midweek, they had grown into full conversations. Did you hear? Someone added lines to the 20-year problem. Another prank, surely. No. The professors called a meeting. They're taking it seriously. The words spread like wildfire through Princeton. Students craned their necks in lecture halls. Professors lowered their voices in the faculty lounge. The unsolved problem that had long become background noise was alive again, and no one knew why. In the dining hall, clusters of students debated. I heard it was Chen, the grad student in geometry, one said. Impossible. He already admitted it wasn't him. Then maybe a visiting scholar? Someone too modest to sign their work? Another student laughed. Or maybe the janitor's ghost, the one who died back in the 80s. The table erupted in laughter, but beneath the jokes lingered unease. Because behind every rumor stood the undeniable fact. The lines were real, and they made sense. In the library, whispers turned sharper. Whoever it was, it's incomplete, one student argued, flipping through his notes. It's progress, yes, but not a solution. A friend leaned closer. But progress after 20 years is not nothing. The first student hesitated. True, but what if it wasn't one of us? What if the writer has no name at all? They laughed nervously, pushing the thought aside. It was easier to joke than to confront the possibility that genius might come from the shadows. Meanwhile, the professors could not dismiss it. Some were irritated. It must be a fluke, they said. Some overeager mind scribbling at random. Others, more cautious, studied the photographed lines late into the night. Their pens tapped against notebooks, their brows furrowed. What unnerved them was not just the logic of the steps, but the perspective, the way the lines leaned into the problem from an unexpected angle, like sunlight entering a room from a window no one had noticed before. It is someone who sees differently, murmured the younger professor, half to himself. The older scholars bristled. Different was dangerous. Different threatened tradition. And yet none of them could erase what had been written. Anna, unaware of the storm, carried on quietly. She scrubbed plates in the diner, wiped down the chalkboards, nursed her mother. Yet she felt something shift in the air when she walked the halls. Students lingered longer at the 20-year problem now, pointing, speculating. Professors stood in small groups, their voices clipped, their eyes sharp. Anna's heart pounded each time she approached the board. Had they guessed? Did they know? But no one looked at her. She was still invisible. The girl with the rag, the hands that erased. And so, night after night, she continued. One evening, she entered the lecture hall to find a group of students already there. They weren't studying for class. They were gathered around the board, whispering, laughing. "Look at this," one of them said, pointing to the faint traces Anna had left. "Can you imagine the arrogance? To think they could solve it?" Another smirked. Whoever it was must be desperate for attention. Anna stood at the doorway, clutching her rag. The students didn't even notice her. Their laughter bounced against the walls, sharp as stones. She wanted to retreat, to flee back into the night, but instead she stepped forward. The sound of her footsteps on the wooden floor made the students glance up. "Oh," one said dismissively, "it's just the cleaner." They moved aside, gathering their books, and left. Anna stood alone again before the board. The laughter still rang in her ears, but when she looked at the chalk marks, her resolve steadied. They were faint, imperfect, but they were hers. She whispered into the silence, "Even if they laugh, I will keep writing." Outside, the news grew larger. Rumors reached the ears of alumni, spread through academic circles beyond Princeton. Emails buzzed, speculations flared. Some dismissed it as nonsense. Others demanded to know more. The problem, dormant for decades, had returned to life. And though most mocked, a small circle of mathematicians felt something stir in their bones. Progress was progress, however humble. The world of numbers cared little for titles. Back in her room, Anna wrote late into the night. She copied fragments, stitched them together, searching for clarity. Her mother, half asleep, asked, "Why do you push yourself so hard?" Anna paused, pen hovering. "Because," she said softly, "this is the one place where I feel I belong. On the board, in the dust, with the numbers." Her mother smiled faintly. "Then stay there, Anna, even if they cannot see you yet." The next morning, the department chair entered the hall. He stared at the board long and hard. Then he turned to his colleagues and said, "We cannot ignore this. Whoever is writing these lines must be found." And so the search began. Students speculated. Professors whispered. And all the while, Anna kept her secret close, carrying her rag in one hand and her notebook in the other. The campus was divided, half in ridicule, half in wonder. But beneath the noise, one truth remained. For the first time in 20 years, the wall had shifted. And nothing would ever be the same again. The professors were running out of explanations. For weeks, the chalkboard had carried new lines, small fragments of reasoning, bold continuations of the 20-year problem. They were too deliberate to be pranks, too consistent to be chance. Yet no student, no faculty member, no visiting scholar had come forward to claim them. The department chair grew restless. "We must identify the hand behind this," he declared in a meeting. "If it is genuine, we need to know. If it is a hoax, we must stop it." Photographs of the board were passed around. Professors studied the handwriting carefully. Some tilted their heads, frowning. "This does not look like the hand of our graduate students," one remarked. "Nor of any colleague?" Another added. It is unfamiliar. The younger professor, who had argued from the start, leaned closer to the photographs. He tapped a finger against the page. Notice the strokes. They are firm, but uneven. Not the script of someone accustomed to writing quickly in lectures. Whoever this is, they write in private. Slowly. Carefully. The room fell silent. A thought none of them wanted to say aloud began to form. Meanwhile, Anna continued her quiet pilgrimage. Each night she returned to the hall. Notebook pressed to her chest, chalk trembling in her hand. She felt the tension in the air now. Professors lingered longer. Students whispered more loudly. But no one ever looked at her. She was still invisible, and invisibility was her shield, or so she thought. One afternoon, as Anna cleaned the corridor outside the department offices, she overheard voices through a half-open door. "The handwriting does not match any of our students," a professor said. "Then who?" another replied. A pause. Then the younger professor's voice. "I have a suspicion. I've seen someone copying notes in the evenings. Someone who is always there. Always silent." Anna froze, her rag dripping water onto the floor. Her heart thundered. Could they mean her? She backed away quietly, but the echo of their words followed her down the hallway. That evening, when Anna returned to the lecture hall, her fear was sharper than ever, yet the chalkboard still pulled at her, irresistible. She wrote quickly, almost desperately, as though time were running out. Her lines were bolder now, reaching deeper into the problem. When she stepped back, her eyes filled with tears. The board no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a companion. And then, footsteps. Anna spun around. The younger professor stood in the doorway watching her. His eyes were not mocking, not cruel. They were stunned. For a long moment, neither spoke. Chalk dust drifted in the air between them. Finally, he whispered, "It was you." Anna's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but only managed, I was just... Just what? His voice was hushed, almost reverent. Just solving what none of us could? Anna shook her head fiercely. No, not solving, only trying, only... She looked down at the rag in her hand. I clean. That's all. The professor stepped closer, studying the lines she had written. His breath caught. This is not the work of someone who only cleans. The next day, the faculty gathered again, this time in the lecture hall itself. The young professor presented what he had witnessed. Some scoffed immediately. Impossible. A cleaner? Absurd. But he pointed to the board. Read it yourselves. She has extended our steps. Not flawlessly, but with vision. She sees patterns we overlooked. The older professors resisted, their pride bristling. But curiosity gnawed at them. One by one they examined the chalk, traced the logic, muttered under their breath. And slowly, disbelief gave way to uneasy silence. It cannot be denied, the chair said finally. The hand that wrote these lines belongs to her. That evening, 2 professors walked to the small apartment on the edge of town. They climbed the creaking stairs, their polished shoes out of place against the worn wood. Anna opened the door cautiously. Behind her, her mother lay resting on the bed, frail but awake. The professors removed their hats, awkward in the cramped room. For a moment they said nothing, only taking in the peeling wallpaper, the borrowed oxygen machine, the stack of notebooks on the desk. At last, the younger professor spoke. Anna, it is you, isn't it? The one who has been writing on the board. Anna lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. I should not have... No. His voice softened. Do not apologize. What you wrote, it startled us. It humbled us. It gave us hope. The older professor, who had once dismissed her with a cruel remark, cleared his throat. His voice was rough. Knowledge does not always wear a robe and title. You reminded us of that. Anna glanced at her mother, who smiled faintly through tired eyes. For the first time, Anna saw not scorn, but respect reflected in the faces before her. When the professors left, the night air was cool, the streets quiet. Anna stood at the window, her mother's hand warm in hers. The truth was no longer hidden. She was no longer invisible. And though the road ahead would be difficult, the secret flame she had carried alone was now seen. The board had revealed more than lines of chalk. It had revealed her. The news spread through Princeton like the tolling of a bell. What had begun as whispers of mystery now had a name, a face, a story. The unknown hand behind the new lines on the 20-year problem was not a student or a visiting scholar. It was Anna, the girl with the rag, the one who had quietly erased their chalkboards for years. The revelation stunned the campus. Some refused to believe it. Others laughed nervously, embarrassed at their earlier scorn. But for many, the truth pierced like light through a stained glass window. Genius could wear humble clothes. Genius could walk silently among them, carrying buckets and cloths, unseen until the right moment. A week later, the faculty convened again, not in secret this time, but in celebration. Anna was summoned to the great hall. She entered hesitantly, her plain dress and calloused hands a stark contrast to the polished wood and shining eyes around her. Her mother, too weak to walk, had been brought in a wheelchair, her gaze bright with pride. The department chair rose to speak. His voice was solemn, but it carried warmth. For 20 years this problem has stood before us, and for 20 years we made no step forward. Yet one among us, someone none of us thought to look toward, has dared to touch it. And not only dared, but illuminated a path. He turned to Anna. You reminded us of something we had forgotten. That knowledge belongs to no single class, no single title. It belongs to every soul willing to labor for it. The room filled with gentle applause. Anna's hands shook. She had no speech prepared. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you." Princeton announced a scholarship in her name. Tuition waived, support for her mother's care, a seat at last, not at the edge of knowledge but within its circle. For the first time in her life, Anna sat in a lecture hall as a student, her notebook open not in secret but in recognition. The professors who once overlooked her now greeted her with respect. The classmates who once laughed now watched her with awe. And though she carried humility like a second skin, Anna could not deny the quiet joy of belonging. Her nights changed too. She no longer erased her own lines. When she wrote on the board, she left them there, bold and clear. And instead of laughter, there was silence, the silence of attention, of minds listening. Her mother's health, though fragile, eased under better care. From her bed, she would say, "I told you, Anna, walls are not only for staring at, they are for climbing." Anna would smile, kiss her hand, and whisper back, "And I climbed because of you." Months passed, and one autumn morning, Anna stood at the front of a lecture hall, not as the girl with the rag, not as the invisible cleaner, but as a young scholar. Chalk in hand, she turned to face the students. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "This," she said, pointing to the board, "is not only a problem of numbers, it is a lesson. For 20 years, people believed this wall was unscalable. But walls are never as strong as they seem. They are waiting for the right hands, the right eyes, the right patience." She paused, looking into the faces before her. And sometimes, those hands are not the ones anyone expected. The students leaned forward, listening, and in that moment, Anna felt something she had never known before. Not only the joy of learning, but the joy of giving knowledge back. The 20-year problem still stood unfinished, but it no longer loomed like an impossible fortress. With Anna's steps carved into its side, others now dared to climb as well. A generation of minds had been stirred awake, their laughter replaced by determination. And for Anna, that was enough. Her victory was not in solving alone, but in opening the way. Years later, she would return to her old apartment, long after her mother's passing, long after the world had come to know her name. She stood in the doorway, looking at the peeling wallpaper, the window that rattled in the wind, the desk still scarred by candle burns. Here, in this small room, the curtain of chalk dust had first lifted. Here, in silence and struggle, she had built the foundation for everything that followed. She sat at the desk, opened her old notebook, and smiled at the shaky handwriting inside. On one page, she had once written, "The wall is to be climbed, not only to be stared at." Tears blurred her vision. She closed the notebook gently, as though tucking a child to sleep. Then she rose, carrying with her not just knowledge, but the memory of the journey, the proof that even in the humblest hands, light can endure. And so the story of Anna became a quiet legend at Princeton. Professors told it in hushed tones to remind their students of humility. Janitors spoke of it proudly, knowing one of their own had carried the flame. Students passed it down as a tale of courage, the girl who was told to erase, but who chose instead to write. Because genius, they learned, does not always stand at the front of the room. Sometimes it waits in the shadows, holding a rag, until the night it dares to step forward. And when it does, the world is never the same again. Thank you for listening to the story of Anna. The young woman once told her hands were meant only for a rag, yet who found the courage to lift a piece of chalk. Hers was not only a journey through mathematics, but a journey through faith, love, and an unyielding hope that refused to fade. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to share it, so that its light may travel a little farther, reaching those who may be struggling quietly in the shadows. Sometimes, a single story is enough to remind someone that no hand is too humble when it reaches for knowledge. Thank you, truly. And I hope you'll join me again for the next story.